We've all developed this strange habit of looking away. It's that split second of holding your breath at the checkout counter. Not because you're out of money, but because you aren't entirely sure what's left. We call it being bad at math. But it's actually a quiet, heavy shame that follows us into our sleep. It's funny how we think avoidance is a shield, when really, it's just making the monster bigger. In Broke Millennial, Erin Lowry doesn't just talk about budgets. She exposes why we treat our own bank accounts like a medical diagnosis we're too afraid to read. By the end of this, you won't just see your numbers, you'll finally see why you've been running from them. So, let's begin. Chapter 1. Ending the fear cycle around money. We've all developed this strange, quiet habit of looking away. It's that moment you're standing in line at the grocery store and you tap your card against the reader, and for 3 seconds, you just hold your breath. It's not that you don't have the money, it's that you aren't entirely sure. You haven't checked the app in 4 days because checking it feels like opening a medical diagnosis you aren't ready to read. We tell ourselves we're just being careless or that we're bad at math, but that's a lie we use to protect ourselves. The truth is, money fear grows in silence. And most of us have been living in a very loud silence for a long time. I remember sitting on my floor once, surrounded by unopened mail. It wasn't even that the bills were astronomical. It was just the physical weight of the paper. I felt like if I opened them, the reality of my life would finally catch up to me, and I'd have to admit, I didn't have a plan. It's funny how we think avoidance is a shield. We think if we don't look at the balance, the debt isn't quite real yet. But avoidance doesn't actually lower the stress. It just spreads it out thin and grey over every single hour of your day. It's the background noise of your life. It's the reason you snapped at your partner over dinner, or why you couldn't fall asleep until 3 a.m., even though you were exhausted. We need to stop pretending that financial struggle is a character flaw. It's not. It's a logistics problem wrapped in a lot of very complicated feelings. You aren't a broke millennial because you're lazy or because you bought a latte. You're likely just stuck in a cycle where money feels like an apex predator instead of a tool. And you can't build a life with a tool you're afraid to touch. When we treat money like the enemy, we give it all the power. We let it dictate our heart rate and our self-worth. But the moment you decide to just look at it, that's when the predator starts to look a lot more like a messy desk that just needs to be organized. There's this odd comfort in the chaos, isn't there? If everything is a mess, you don't have to try, because trying feels hopeless. But that hopelessness is expensive. It's costing you your peace. I used to think that getting my life together meant suddenly having a 6-figure salary and a suit. It doesn't. It starts with the uncomfortable, slightly sweaty-palmed realization that you are the one in charge of the numbers, not the other way around. Money stress isn't about math. It's about shame. It's the shame of feeling behind, the shame of should have known better, the shame of comparing your bank account to someone else's highlight reel. Funny how peace feels boring until chaos returns. We claim we want stability, but we're addicted to the adrenaline of the escape. We need to break the habit of running. Calm begins the moment you stop treating money like a monster under the bed and start treating it like a roommate you finally need to have a serious talk with. It's going to be awkward. You're going to feel a little exposed. But once the light is on, you realize the room wasn't as haunted as you thought. It's just a room, and you're the one with the key. Chapter 2. Seeing your financial reality without panic. There's a specific kind of internal cringe that happens when you finally sit down to look at your bank statement from the last 30 days. It's a physical sensation, a tightening in the chest, as you scroll past the 3 different streaming subscriptions you forgot to cancel, and the sheer volume of small $20 purchases that somehow added up to a mountain. It's easy to feel like you're looking at a list of your own failures. But that's the trap. We think looking at the numbers is a form of punishment, so we avoid it to keep our spirits up. In reality, guessing is much heavier than knowing. When you guess, your mind fills in the gaps with worst-case scenarios. When you know, you just have a set of facts. And facts are things you can actually work with. It's a bit of a contradiction, but awareness feels deeply uncomfortable right before it starts to feel empowering. It's like turning on the lights in a room you've been sitting in for hours in the dark. At first, the light hurts your eyes and you want to shut them again. You see the dust, the laundry piled in the corner, the glass you knocked over. But once your eyes adjust, you realize you can finally start cleaning. Tracking your spending or building a budget isn't about restricting your life or turning into a person who never has any fun. It's actually the opposite. It's about honesty. It's about looking at your life and saying, okay, this is where the leaks are. I knew a guy who refused to check his balance for an entire year. He just lived on a vibe of what he thought he had. He lived in a constant state of low-level electricity, always waiting for the card to be declined, always over-analyzing the look on the cashier's face. When he finally sat down and did the math, he realized he was actually okay. He just had no system. The anxiety was entirely optional. We carry so much weight trying to keep the vibe alive, when the reality, even if it's lean, is much easier to carry because it's solid. Knowing is lighter than guessing. A budget isn't a cage, it's a map. If you're lost in the woods, a map doesn't tell you that you aren't allowed to walk. It just tells you which direction actually leads home. Most of us treat our finances like we're trying to navigate a forest at midnight with no flashlight. We stumble into debt. We trip over unexpected bills, and we wonder why we're so tired. Clarity replaces that frantic, flailing energy with a quiet sense of control. It's the difference between being pushed by the tide and actually having your hands on the oars. It's okay if the first time you do this, you feel a little sick. It's okay if you realize you spent more on takeout last month than you did on your future. That realization isn't there to shame you, it's there to wake you up. We often think that if we ignore the reality, we're somehow staying free. But true freedom isn't the ability to ignore your bank account. It's the ability to look at it and not feel your heart rate spike. It's the ability to make a choice because you know exactly what that choice costs. You start to realize that the numbers are just data, and data doesn't have the power to tell you who you are. It only tells you where you are, and once you know where you are, you can finally decide where you're going. Chapter 3. Debt, Credit, and the Cost of Not Understanding the System. There's a specific kind of weight that comes with debt, one that feels less like a number and more like a heavy, wet coat you can't take off. We're taught to feel a deep sense of personal shame about it, as if owing money is a direct reflection of our character or our intelligence. But for most of us, debt didn't happen because we were reckless or greedy. It happened because we were invited into a system that was designed to be misunderstood. Confusion keeps debt alive. If the rules were clear and the math was transparent, the industry wouldn't be nearly as profitable as it is. We aren't failing the system. The system is functioning exactly as intended by keeping us just confused enough to keep paying the interest. Think about credit scores for a second. It's this invisible 3-digit number that follows you around like a ghost, whispering to landlords and lenders about whether or not you're trustworthy. It's bizarre when you really think about it, a game where the rules aren't taught in school, yet the stakes involve where you can live and how much your life will cost you. Most of us spend our 20s trying to figure out if we should have a credit card, how many is too many, and why our score dropped 10 points for seemingly no reason at all. It feels like a trap because, in a way, it is. But the trap only works if you stay in the dark. I remember talking to someone who had been carrying a balance on a high-interest card for years. They were making the minimum payments religiously, thinking they were doing the right thing. They didn't realize that at an 18% or 22% interest rate, they weren't actually paying off the debt. They were just paying for the privilege of staying in debt. It's a treadmill that never ends unless you find the off switch. The moment they understood how compounding interest worked against them, the fear turned into a very quiet, very focused anger. And anger, oddly enough, is often more useful than anxiety. It gets you moving. It's a strange contradiction of modern life. We're told that credit is essential for success, yet we're shamed for actually using it. We're expected to navigate complex loan terms and interest cycles with no formal training. And when we get overwhelmed, we're told we just lack discipline. But discipline isn't the problem. Literacy is. Freedom starts when you stop looking at credit as a mystery and start seeing it as a machine. Machines have levers. They have logic. Once you learn the rules of the game, you stop being a piece on the board and start becoming the player. Funny how we call it borrowing when, most of the time, we're actually selling our future hours to pay for our past ones. Every time you swipe that card without a plan, you're essentially committing your future self to work for free. When you see it that way, the shiny new thing in your hand starts to lose its luster. Understanding the system doesn't mean you'll never use credit again. It means you'll use it on your terms. It means you'll know exactly what that 0% down offer is actually asking of you. You move from a place of being hunted by bills to a place of quiet observation. You realize that while you can't change the system overnight, you can absolutely stop being its favorite victim. Chapter 4. Escaping Overwhelming Obligations, Step by Step. I have a confession to make. For a long time, I thought that if I couldn't pay off my student loans in one giant cinematic gesture, there was no point in trying at all. I'd look at that 5-figure balance and feel a total sense of paralysis. It felt like trying to empty the ocean with a plastic spoon. When the debt is that big, when it's a mix of student loans, a car note, and a credit card balance that traveled with you from college, it stops feeling like money and starts feeling like weather. Like a permanent thunderstorm you just have to live under. You get used to the rain. You stop looking for the sun because the sheer scale of the obligation makes you feel small and stuck. This emotional paralysis is the most expensive part of being in debt. It keeps you from making the small moves that actually matter. We get obsessed with finding the perfect strategy. Should I do the snowball method? The avalanche? Should I consolidate? And we spend so much time researching the best way that we end up doing nothing. We stay frozen in the planning phase because it feels safer than actually sending $50 toward a balance that's $50,000. But progress matters more than perfect strategies, every single time. I remember talking to a friend who was drowning in medical bills and a lingering personal loan. She told me she felt like she was failing at being an adult. That's the phrase that kills us, isn't there? This idea that there's a version of adulthood where you have everything figured out and your balance is always green. But that version doesn't exist for most of us. She started by just paying an extra $10 a month. $10. It felt ridiculous to her, almost insulting. But 3 months in, she realized she hadn't missed that money. More importantly, she realized she was finally moving. The storm hadn't stopped, but she had started walking. This is fixable slowly. The secret no one tells you about a plan is that its primary job isn't actually to move the money, it's to dissolve the fear. A calm plan acts like a sedative for your anxiety. When you have a spreadsheet or even just a scribbled note on your fridge that says, "I am paying X amount on Y date," the monster under the bed loses its teeth. You aren't stuck anymore, you're just in transit. There's a profound psychological shift that happens when you stop being someone who owes money and start being someone who is executing a repayment plan. The debt hasn't changed, but your identity has. It's a bit of a contradiction, but sometimes the fastest way to get out of debt is to stop trying to do it fast. When we try to go too fast, we burn out. We live on beans and rice for 2 weeks, get miserable, and then go on a revenge spending spree because we feel deprived. That's the cycle that keeps us broke. Real escape is boring. It's consistent. It's the quiet, repetitive act of choosing your future over your immediate comfort. One small payment at a time. You don't need a miracle. You don't need a lottery win or a sudden inheritance to start feeling better. You just need a direction. The moment you decide to stop running and just take one step, however small, however insignificant it feels, the paralysis breaks. You realize that while the mountain is high, the path is right there under your feet. You aren't drowning, you're just swimming against a current, and you're a lot stronger than you think. Chapter 5. Saving and investing before you feel ready. We have this collective hallucination that saving is something you do once you finally have enough money. We tell ourselves that once the car is paid off, or once the rent stops going up, or once we get that 10% raise, then we'll start the real work. We treat our financial security like a guest who's only invited to the party once the house is perfectly clean. But the truth is, if you wait until you feel ready, you'll be waiting forever. Security starts smaller than expected, and usually it starts when things still feel a little messy. It's a contradiction that most people miss. You don't save because you have extra. You save so that one day, extra isn't a miracle, but a baseline. I used to look at the investing section of news sites and feel an immediate sense of exclusion. It felt like a club for people who already had a surplus of everything: time, money, and confidence. I thought investing was about predicting the future or being a math whiz who could read those jagged red and green lines on a screen. But that's just the noise the industry makes to sound important. Real investing is actually quite boring. It's the quiet, almost invisible act of paying your future self before you pay the electric company or the grocery store. It's building a bridge while you're still standing on the cliffside rather than waiting for a helicopter that might never come. Waiting for extra money is a trap because our lives have a funny way of expanding to fit whatever we earn. It's called lifestyle creep, but it feels more like a slow leak. You get a raise and suddenly you need better coffee, or a slightly faster internet plan, or a new pair of boots because the old ones look tired. Before you know it, that extra $300 a month has vanished into the atmosphere of your daily life. Paying yourself first, even if it's just $20 a week, builds a different kind of muscle. It builds trust. You're telling yourself, "I am worth more than my bills." And that's a powerful thing to believe when you've spent years feeling like a pass-through entity for your landlord's mortgage. Funny how we'll spend hours researching the best deal on a laptop, but we won't spend 10 minutes setting up an automated transfer to a high-yield savings account. We're wired to value the tangible thing we can hold right now over the theoretical peace we might have in 10 years. But investing is just the process of turning long-term fear into stability. It's taking the what-ifs that keep you up at night. What if I lose my job? What if the roof leaks? And answering them with a pile of cash that grows while you sleep. There's a quiet dignity in having a FU fund, even if it's only a few $100s deep at first. It changes how you sit in your chair at work. It changes how you respond to a boss who's overstepping. You start to realize that security isn't a destination you reach. It's a shadow that grows longer the more you feed it. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to understand the inner workings of the stock market to realize that money kept is better than money spent on things you won't remember in 6 months. You start where you are with what you have, and you stop apologizing for the amount. The ready feeling is a myth. The doing is the only thing that's real. Chapter 6. Money inside relationships, choices, and self-worth. I once saw a couple at a coffee shop, and the tension between them was so thick you could practically see it hovering over their lattes. It wasn't about cheating or some grand betrayal. It was about a Target receipt. She had bought some throw pillows they didn't need, and he was doing that thing where he wasn't yelling, but his silence was loud enough to hurt. In that moment, those pillows weren't just fabric and stuffing. They were a symbol of every unspoken fear they had about their future. Money exposes unspoken expectations like nothing else in this world. We like to think our relationships are built on shared values and chemistry, but they are also built on how we decide to divide the electric bill and who pays for the appetizers. Financial tension has a way of leaking into the cracks of our lives, into our friendships, our families, and our bedrooms. We've been conditioned to think that talking about money is tacky or unromantic, so we keep our mouths shut until the resentment boils over. We go out to dinner with friends who earn twice what we do, and when the bill comes, we split it evenly because we're too embarrassed to say, "I only had a side salad." We're essentially paying a shame tax just to keep up appearances. But if you can't be honest about your bank account with the people you love, are you really being honest about your life? Lifestyle decisions reveal our values more than our income ever will. You might know someone who makes $250,000 a year, but lives in a state of constant panic because their overhead is a cage. Then you see someone else, making half that, who moves through the world with a quiet, unshakable ease. The difference isn't the math, it's the alignment. When your spending matches your soul, there's no friction. But when you're spending money to project an image of a person you aren't even sure you like, you'll always feel poor, no matter how many zeros are in your account. It's a bit of a contradiction, but sometimes the most selfish thing you can do for a relationship is to get your own money right. When you aren't relying on someone else to save you, or when you aren't constantly worried about your partner's secret spending, the air in the room gets lighter. You stop being a parent or a child to your partner and start being an equal. Money is the leading cause of divorce, not because people are greedy, but because they are scared, and fear is a terrible foundation for love. Honest money conversations, the kind that happen on a Tuesday night over cold pizza, prevent the kind of resentment that ruins decades. Funny how we think our self-worth is tied to our net worth, yet we'll ignore our own needs to satisfy someone else's idea of success. We buy the house because that's what you do at 30. Or we stay in the soul-crushing job because we're afraid of what the neighbors will think if we downsize. We're so busy performing for a crowd that isn't even watching that we forget we're the ones who have to live with the bill. Money is just a mirror. It shows you what you prioritize, what you fear, and what you think you deserve. The goal isn't just to have more, it's to make sure that what you have is serving the life you actually want to live, not the one you think you're supposed to have. Money doesn't change who you are, it just amplifies it. Chapter 7. Building a financial life you can sustain. We spend so much time looking for the big win, the promotion, the windfall, the one lucky break that will finally make us feel like we've arrived. We treat financial peace like a destination we'll eventually reach and then never have to leave. But the truth is, enough is a long-term skill. It's not a number in a bank account that stays fixed. It's a muscle you build by showing up every day and making choices that respect your future self. Income growth rarely comes from just working harder. It comes from the confidence of knowing your value and having the quiet courage to ask for it. And that confidence? It doesn't come from perfection. It comes from the mess you've already survived. You don't need to be an expert to stay grounded. You don't need to spend your weekends reading white papers on market volatility or obsessing over every fluctuation of the economy. Most of the expertise out there is just noise designed to make you feel like you need a middleman to manage your own life. Real sustainability is much simpler and much quieter. It's the consistency of knowing what you have, knowing where it's going, and being okay with the fact that some months will be better than others. Life is going to happen. The car will break, the roof will leak, the job might disappear for a while. But those things aren't failures of your system. They are exactly what the system was built to handle. It's funny how we think we need to be fixed, when really we just need to be honest. We think we're broken because we haven't hit some arbitrary milestone by age 30 or 40. But financial peace isn't a trophy. It's a rhythm. It's the absence of that frantic background hum of anxiety. It's the ability to breathe deeply when you open your mail. You realize that the goal isn't to be rich. The goal is to be unshakable. To be the kind of person who can handle a crisis without losing their sense of self. There's a quiet power in realizing that you are already doing the work just by listening to this. You've stopped running. You've turned around to face the thing that used to make you hold your breath. That shift in perspective is more valuable than any hot tip or secret investment strategy. You're learning to trust yourself again, and that trust is the only thing that actually lasts. You aren't just managing money. You are reclaiming your time, your energy, and your peace of mind. The weight you've been carrying for years, the shame of being behind or the fear of being found out, it doesn't have to be yours anymore. You can put it down. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. You've realized that the math was never the hard part. It was the courage to look at it. And now that you're looking, the monster doesn't look so big. It's just a path, and you're already on it. It's strange, isn't it? How we spend years fearing a conversation with ourselves that only takes 20 minutes to have. If you're sitting there right now feeling that small, quiet spark of, I can actually do this, I'd love to hear what that feels like for you. Was there a specific moment today where the fear started to feel a little smaller? If you feel like sharing that realization, I'll be in the comments. And if this conversation felt like something you needed to hear tonight, maybe stick around for the next one. It's good to have you here.